Hello and welcome to Politics Today. As you can see from our studio, these are strange times, so I have no studio guests today because we're in the midst of the COVID-19 epidemic in which all of us are practicing social distancing, and so therefore we're having to use the latest technology in order to have excellent guests, which we have today. I'll be joined by Michael McCann, who is the director of Israel-Britain Alliance, and also Sharon Claff from the Campaign of Truth. And today's topic, we're going to have a break from discussing the coronavirus, and instead we're going to discuss a very important development in British politics, and that is the election of Sir Keir Starmer as the new leader of the Labour Party, and discussing can he shape the party to go in a different direction than his predecessor, Jeremy Corbyn, because for the last 5 years, the Labour Party has been struggling to confront and deal with the issue of anti-Semitism, many actually blaming the leader himself, Jeremy Corbyn, for actually causing this crisis. And we've seen that the hard left took complete control of the party and led them to two disastrous election defeats. So can Keir Starmer actually change the direction and the course of the Labour Party and see him gain the keys to 10 Downing Street? So let's have a look now at who is Keir Starmer.
And we need to unite, come together and shape that future. That's why I'm standing to be leader of the Labour Party. Jeremy Corbyn made our party the party of anti-austerity, and he was right to do so. The party that would fight cuts to public services.
So we're now joined by Michael McCann, the director of Israel-Britain Alliance and a former Labour MP, to discuss the election victory for the leadership of the Labour Party, Keir Starmer. Michael, warm welcome to the programme.
Hello, Simon. Good to see you again.
Good to see you again as well. Now, could you just give our viewers a bit of an inside track, as you were a Labour MP for 5 years? Who is Keir Starmer?
Well, Keir Starmer entered Parliament after I left. I fought the election in 2015 on the back of the Scottish referendum. We were virtually wiped out in Scotland, and then Keir Starmer was elected into what was a safe seat in London. His history was, of course, that he was the head of the leading prosecutor in England under the CPS and Director of Public Prosecutions, and he was known to have a left-leaning background. But of course, once he left the CPS, he became a Labour MP, and that's quite frankly, I don't know an awful lot about him more than that, and probably that's the same as everybody else.
Michael, it seems like you have more experience to be leader of the Labour Party than Keir Starmer has. Do you think that this will be a problem, his lack of political experience, only really being an MP for 5 years?
Kind of you say so, Simon, but I doubt they would have me back since I didn't vote for them in the last general election, which was publicly on record, because I refused to vote for a party that had an anti-Semite as its leader, because in my view there was never any doubt that Jeremy Corbyn was and is an anti-Semite. In terms of his experience, you can certainly make up for that experience if you've got the talent, the skills and the intellect to do so. My concern is not whether he has those particular talents. My concern is he a coward or is he a man of principle? That's the two key issues for me. And from my perspective, the jury is out on that.
So we've seen that the former leader of the Labour Party, Jeremy Corbyn, has led the Labour Party to 2 electoral defeats in the past 2 general elections. Is this the reason why the Labour Party members have turned to Keir Starmer as their deliverer to try and deliver them an election victory?
Well, I suspect that they've chosen the moderate candidate and someone who they perhaps think has the gravitas to overcome the circumstances that they find themselves in. But, of course, those circumstances are all self-inflicted. Ed Miliband left a vacuum when he lost the election in 2015 and immediately left. And in that vacuum, the madness started, where normally sensible MPs like Gareth Thomas and others, and people like Sadiq Khan, nominated Jeremy Corbyn, thinking that he was a no-hoper, breaking the rules of the party and the reasons why you have a nomination process in the first place. And then there was this surge in membership from people who had previously been kicked out of the Labour Party and had been members of other extreme parties across the length and breadth of the United Kingdom. They joined the Labour Party and gave Corbyn a victory, an unexpected victory, when his candidacy was first announced. And then the madness continued because, of course, the Parliamentary Labour Party, the reason they have a nominations process and you have to pass by a certain threshold before you can get on the ballot paper is because you have to have a level of support within the Parliamentary Labour Party. Corbyn didn't have that, and that swiftly led to another leadership election, which he won again because of this disconnect between the views of the Parliamentary Labour Party and the views of the members who had joined in droves when Corbyn became a feature in the ballot paper. So, that whole mess was created by Ed Miliband's departure. We got Corbyn. But remember, when he lost the 2017 general election, because he'd done better than many people expected, then he was allowed to continue until, of course, we got to December 2019 when the chaos of Brexit meant there was no other option but a general election. Boris Johnson's strategy was the correct one. He pulled and dragged kicking and screaming the Labour Party, not so much the Liberal Democrats, who thought that they were going to win an election and even touted themselves as potentially being the next government. And the rest, as they say, is history. And Corbyn had to go after losing that election so badly and his policies being, quite frankly, ripped apart. But Keir Starmer comes in. He's made a start by, reaching out to the Jewish community. But when I said I don't know if he's a man of principle or a coward, well, let me tell you why. Because when Ruth Smith was being attacked at a meeting, remember, which was to give the report about how Labour was going to deal with anti-Semitism, and one of Corbyn's supporters stood up and shouted her down and started using the old tropes about Jewish people controlling the media and all the rest of it, he did absolutely nothing. And when people were being attacked left, right and centre by anti-Semites inside the Labour Party did nothing. And Keir Starmer was very noticeable by his silence. So quite frankly, I'm not convinced in any way, shape or form that this guy's got the qualities to do it. If he proves me wrong, I'll be delighted. But he's got a long way to go. I'll give you just 2 quick examples. Keir Starmer joined the Labour Friends of Palestine, but he refused to join Labour Friends of Israel. Keir Starmer has a Jewish wife, but has never once visited Israel. And incidentally, let me just tell you that as soon as you join Parliament, you're approached by groups like Labour Friends of Israel, and you're given the opportunity to go on a trip. I've got no doubt he was given the opportunity to go on a fact-finding mission to Israel, and given that he didn't go, I would suggest that he refused to do so. Why did he do that? The only reason I can conclude is because he was fearful that if he did so, he would be attacked by the Corbynites, which, in my book, demonstrates that in those circumstances that he's a coward.
That's good analysis. So, for example, we've had 5 years of Jeremy Corbyn, 5 years of Momentum, the hard left faction within the Labour Party, controlling the party's mechanism. Do you think that Keir Starmer has the ability to actually defeat the hard left? As the latest news, as of recording this programme, is that Momentum is asking for all factions of the hard left to join together to fight the party moving to the centre of British politics.
Well, he's appointed people to his shadow cabinet that supported everything that Jeremy Corbyn did. Andy McDonald's still there. Rebecca Long-Bailey's still there. Cat Smith's still there. These people supported the agenda put forward by Corbyn, and indeed even in the little part of the programme that you showed asking who was Keir Starmer, there was a part in it which says that Jeremy Corbyn, where he states Jeremy Corbyn was right to do X, Y and Z. Jeremy Corbyn wasn't right on anything that he did, from the domestic political agenda straight through to his foreign affairs agenda, in my book, because he took the Labour Party away from people like me. And quite frankly, I'll be honest with you, Simon, if there was a general election tomorrow, then I wouldn't be convinced to vote for Labour again simply because Keir Starmer's taken over the controls.
So, Michael, a very important issue to you and for myself and to our viewers is what approach will Sir Keir Starmer take towards the Jewish community regarding anti-Semitism, but also Israel as well, knowing that he's appointed Lisa Mandy as his shadow foreign secretary, and she is the chair of Labour Friends of Palestine, as was Keir himself.
Well, here's my thesis on this, Simon. The anti-Semitism in the Labour Party, and in terms of the people who are there, and I know a lot of them that are still there, is based on two things. One, the old tropes that the Jewish people control the media and they control world finance and all the rest of it. All that nonsense is still there among some of them. But the other part of it is that the new anti-Semitism is based on a hatred of Israel, anti-Zionism. Now, you and I have talked about this before. If you're an anti-Zionist, then given that the state of Israel now has its home in its ancient homeland, then what you're actually calling for is for the state of Israel not to exist anymore. And that's not only anti-Semitic. You and I have discussed and reached the conclusion before that that's actually, quite frankly, suggesting that you should support genocide. And that's something that's extremely serious in that point, in that argument. So therefore, what Keir Starmer has to do is to demonstrate a balanced policy on Israel, to take the approach that was taken by people like Gordon Brown and Tony Blair in the past, where, of course, you can be critical of Israel as you can be critical of any other nation in the world, but he has to have a positive perspective on Israel and have a good relationship with Israel and its representatives in our country. If he doesn't do that, then there's going to be a real problem, because that anti-Zionism equals anti-Semitism equation will still be there. And let's look at how you can change that and where his difficulties lie. He has appointed Lisa Nandy. I know Lisa Nandy very well. I think she comes across as being very articulate on a lot of issues, not in foreign affairs. She hasn't got a clue about the history of Israel, how the nation was reborn again in 1948, the trials and tribulations it's came through since that, all the wars it's had to fight, the terrorism it's had to fight. And in fact, you might recall that she was on a television programme where she attacked Mark Bregev, the Israeli ambassador to the UK. So quite frankly, she doesn't have the credentials in my book to be able to change that dynamic and change that fundamental problem that exists within the Labour Party. And the difficulty that he has on top of all of that is that Jeremy Corbyn has gone back to the backbenches. Now, during my time between 2010 and 2015, I was an avid supporter and robust supporter of Israel. Any debate on Israel, I was there defending the Jewish state. I can guarantee you, Jeremy Corbyn was there, and he never, ever took a conciliatory line on any of those issues. The problem you're going to have is Jeremy Corbyn, who is an older man now, and you would have thought that his brand of politics would have sort of fizzled out when he was gone. He's now on the back benches with people like Richard Burgon, who believe in his philosophy, hook, line and sinker. So the danger is people like Richard Burgon and others that support that type of hard left extreme politics are going to be there mounting attacks against Keir Starmer's leadership if he takes the party in a different direction. And who knows, in 20 or 25 years' time, when Jeremy Corbyn is no longer in the House of Commons, people might think, a new generation might think that Richard Burgon is a new magic grandpa.
Michael, Keir Starmer has his whole background as a lawyer specialising in human rights, and he's saying that he wants his Labour's foreign policy to focus on human rights issues, as he was also demonstrated against the Iraq War in 2003. So do you think that he can then look at the issue to do with the Israeli-Palestinian conflict objectively and actually look at the hideous human rights abuses being committed by Hamas in Gaza and also the Palestinian Authority in Ramallah against the Palestinian people themselves?
Well, that's going to be the big test for him, because we know that when people from the left talk about human rights, they tend to only see it from one perspective, i.e. the human rights of the people that they support in any conflict. And the problem of trying to be equitable in this situation never comes through. So the first question you have to ask Keir Starmer or his representatives like Lisa Nandy on this is this: if Israel is attacked, as it is frequently, every week, every month of the year, has Israel got a right to defend itself? And how can it defend itself properly when you've got organisations like Hamas and Islamic Jihad and others who are putting their own people in harm's way, using schools and hospitals as caches for their arms, launching rockets from those sites? How is Israel to defend itself against that? Because too often, all we see is the knee-jerk reaction where Israel defends itself. The Palestinians report the death count that they've created by the action that they've taken. And then we lose all sense of perspective. And all it becomes is a battle in the House of Commons, mostly between the Labour Party side and the government side, because the government side tends to be more sensible. The Conservative government is more sensible when it comes to issues concerning Israel, and they appreciate there's a balance to be struck. So that'll be the first test for them, because when the next violence flares up in Gaza or another part of the Middle East, and Israel is forced to defend itself, the reaction from the Labour Party will tell us everything we need to know about their direction of travel.
Michael, I just want to thank you so much for joining us from Glasgow and giving us the insight into the new leader of the Labour Party, Keir Starmer.
You're most welcome, Simon. Once again, all my best to everybody at Revelation TV. Keep safe, and to all your viewers, keep safe too.
Thank you. Thanks very much, Michael. So let's have a look now at Keir Starmer's first shadow cabinet. And there are some prizes that he has in store for all of us by promoting Ed Miliband back to frontline politics and making him his shadow business secretary.
Labour Party members, indeed like all party members, are slightly or quite significantly unlike the electorate at large. They have very distinct policy positions that they're very keen on, but nevertheless right now I think Labour Party members are in a situation where they're willing to compromise. In other words, they're starting to prioritise winning an election, and they certainly see Keir Starmer as the candidate who is most likely to be able to win an election, as well as being competent and the strongest candidate. And at the same time, they don't seem to be having to compromise too much, in the sense that they also see him as principled, and even a significant minority of the people who are going to be voting for the Labour leader see him as having positions similar to their own. So
to discuss the election victory of Keir Starmer, I'm joined by my good friend Sharon Clough, who heads up Campaign for Truth up in North London. Sharon, it's great that you can join us today, especially this very holy time for the Jewish community, as you are in the midst of Passover or Pesach celebrations.
Hi, Simon. Thank you for having me back again. And I'm really pleased in times like this that we can still communicate and talk to each other.
Absolutely, in these difficult and dangerous times. So, Sharon, I'd like to ask you what your thoughts are, knowing that you made the news a couple of years ago in which you were brutally attacked in a hideous anti-Semitic attack by Jeremy Corbyn supporters. What are your thoughts on Keir Starmer becoming the new leader of the Labour Party, and do you think that he can confront the issue of anti-Semitism that has dominated the Labour Party under the leadership of Jeremy Corbyn?
Okay, so I think we can see this in two streams. I think that there's the Labour Party that Corbyn has dominated for 5 years now and changed completely into something else. And then there's the anti-Semitism. So anybody taking over from Corbyn and trying to make sense of a Labour Party that could be a viable opposition has a very steep hill to climb and probably a mountain to climb. And so the Labour Party members have elected Keir Starmer. He's a person who's been in Parliament only for about 5 years. So he doesn't have a huge experience on international affairs and so on. But he comes with an experience of in the law. He's a QC. He has a career behind him where he worked on human rights. And he was also director of the Public Prosecution Service. So he comes with a bit of experience in that background. But what kind of person is he that's going to take both sides, all sides of the Labour Party with him to try and reestablish some sort of viable party into the future? And I've been looking at his background at the CPS, and I think one of the things that struck me is that this is a man who, or could be somebody who's not sure. He kind of seems to flip-flop. So, for instance, there were 3 cases under the CPS that are pinpointed. The one was Ian Tomlinson. You may remember that was the news vendor that was shot. The next one was the Twitter joker with the guy whose plane was cancelled, and he tweeted a joke about the bombing the airport. And so the last thing was the Palestinian flags at the Labour Party conference. So these cases at the DPS, at the CPS, that when he was headed it up, he at first had no prosecutions, then he had prosecutions and so on. So he seemed to not be sure where he was going to go with these cases. And I see this in him now as leader or member of the Labour Party. He was in the shadow cabinet that he resigned in 2016 because he objected to Corbyn, but then he rejoined it again as Brexit minister, shadow minister. So he didn't go away from Corbyn. He kind of hovered around, and latterly we see him sitting next to Corbyn on the front benches. So he comes to us talking about anti-Semitism, and yet he didn't walk away from Corbyn as many good Labour Party people did. We had Tom Watson left and quite a few others left. So the question is, how is he going to deal with something called anti-Semitism in a Labour Party? And if he tries to do that, is he going to be effective in dealing with that?
So I've got 3 minutes left, so I just want to read you out a quick paragraph that Keir Starmer wrote in the Jewish Chronicle this week. He said, "Anti-Semitism has been a stain on our party. I have seen firsthand the unacceptable, unimaginable levels of grief and distress it has caused many in the Jewish community. It is why my very first act on becoming leader over the weekend was to apologise for the hurt that has been caused, and I reiterate that apology again. But I accept that an apology is not good enough. I know that ultimately I will be judged not on what I say, but on what I do. Tracking anti-Semitism within the Labour Party must be a priority, and I want to step out all steps I'm making to begin restoring trust with the Jewish community." So what are your thoughts on that statement that he wrote in the Jewish Chronicle?
Okay, so I've got two points on that. The one point is that in an unprecedented time of this pandemic that we're all going through, I kind of wonder why his first step was to write to the Jewish community about anti-Semitism and not write to the Prime Minister and say, "I'm the new leader of the Labour Party, I'm going to join with you and we're going to fight this together." So that was my first question. And I would imagine that many people in the country would be wondering why this new leader is focusing so much on one section of the community and not all of the citizens. The other thing is that anti-Semitism has been called a stain, a plague, a virus, a poison. Well, it's really none of those. Anti-Semitism is an ancient, indescribable, illogical hatred. And the question that arises, why did it manifest so overtly in the Labour Party, when really there's an underlying anti-Semitism anyway across the board, an anti-Semitism that people find that we live with, that we don't really talk about, but the Labour Party seems to have come to the fore in verbalizing this hatred. And this is the question, is how do you deal with those people? It's not the anti-Semitism. It's the people who see fit to express hideous comments, hideous thoughts, and then apologize for them as though it's not them, it's not their intrinsic beings that are behaving this way, but just some sort of mistake that they're making. So I think Keir Starmer has got a bigger job than just looking at anti-Semitism. He needs to look at the kind of person that is becoming, is ascending in the hierarchy of the Labour Party. And I fear that the Labour Party has lost its good people and it's retained the people that it really doesn't want.
Sharon,
they're in Parliament. Yeah.
Sorry, Sharon. Thank you so much for joining us on Politics Today. It's an absolute pleasure, and I look forward to having you back in our studio when this COVID-19 crisis is all over. So keep up the good work you're doing, and Hag Sameah Pesach to you and the Jewish community.
Thank you, Simon, and happy Easter to all of you.
Thank you. So we've seen in these two interviews, one with Michael McCann, also with Sharon Clough, that the new leader of the Labour Party, Keir Starmer, has a lot to do, not only to convince the Jewish community, but also to rid the party of the hard left, to rid the party of those anti-Semites that have dominated the party under the leadership of Jeremy Corbyn. So the real test for him will be to see that if he can hold the centre ground in the party, if he can modernise it, and if he can then reach out to Middle England in order to win the election, the next general election, that is. So it's very important in these times that we watch what's happening in domestic politics. We pray for our political leaders like Boris Johnson and the new leader of the Labour Party. So I want to thank you for watching Politics Today.